until you're going to be off mute in a sec.
Yeah, I'll be on there until.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's PowerBrew. I'm Libby Trossel with Advantage C, a service of Carroll Community College. And today's PowerBrew is about safe meetings. Technical difficulty. Okay. And with us in our control booth today is Michelle Shepard, also with Advantage C. And Michelle is going to be taking your questions today and getting them to our presenter throughout the presentation. So just a little bit about Advantage C. We are a service of Carroll Community College, as you know. And if you've joined our PowerBrews before, you recognize some of the services that we provide. And thinking about this presentation this morning, I'm really excited to talk to you about Advantage C because we're doing some really exciting projects in the community. We're working with some area nonprofits and some corporations for leadership development, business writing, conflict management, dealing with difficult people, all kinds of topics that are helpful to your employees in the workplace. So today, you can see I've got my Advantage C visor on. We ordered these for the Tech Council Golf Tournament, so we have some extras. So today what I want to do is provide you with a brochure for Advantage C services that includes testimonials from our customers. And you mouse it through the chat window. We will mail one of these out to you along with a free Advantage C visor just for taking a look at our brochure. I guess we can take this off while we. Okay. And then I also want to mention to you our training, workforce training certificate in management development training. More information can be found on our website, but we're offering those classes once or twice a month, open to the community, to you, to employees in your organization, and they really build the foundational skills that people need to either be effective in a management or leadership role or to move up to a management or leadership role. It's a very popular certificate training that we do. You can attend one course or all 11 of the courses to earn the workforce training certificate. So be sure to check out more information online about that.
I just wanted to mention quickly that does start in September. The new cohort starts in September.
Okay.
You start in September.
Okay, yeah, start in September. You can have your certificate by the end of the year. Okay, today's webinar is Safe Meetings, and Mike Mannion, who is a frequent presenter for us and also a valued Advantage C adjunct faculty member, is going to be presenting today. And so Mike has led 2 CEO organizations in the Mid-Atlantic, Vistage and Convene, and helping CEOs build and lead more valuable companies. For the past 3 years, Mike partners with Vantage, a company that runs the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission's Leadership Academy and trains Navy SEALs on meeting and briefing skills. Mike and his wife live in Westminster with their children, and they spend time at Johns Hopkins Hospital helping 4 of their kids fight a terminal illness and find victory and transformation in the journey. And Mike is a really insightful guy. He's got some new information today that's going to help you really transform meetings in the workplace. So we're all excited to hear about it. And so without further ado, Mike.
Thank you very much, Libby. So I was in an elevator with Donna, who is a senior executive HR professional. In fact, runs HR for one of the largest healthcare organizations in the United States. And we were on the 4th floor, and we were traveling down to the main level because I was about to lead a meeting with 23 executive level nurses that would be around this in this conference room in this horseshoe, and I was going to be the presenter. And just before we get to the main level and just before the doors open, Donna says something like this to me. She says, "Oh, by the way, just so that you know what the vibe of the room is going to be and the kind of reception you're going to get. The vibe in the room is going to be this. We are nurses and you are not. we save lives, and you do not. So please feel free to either bow or genuflect whenever you feel like it. In other words, Mike, this is a hostile audience. They're not looking forward to this meeting, and you've really got your work cut out for you. Bing, the door's open, and I'm thinking, whoa, what in the world am I going to do to create the right conditions for this meeting to be successful? Now, in truth, I should have asked Donna months ago when we first started talking about me running this meeting, what the vibe in the room would be, but I didn't do that. So I had to think quickly, and frankly, I was scrambling. And from the time the elevator doors opened and I walked down the hall into the conference room, I had remembered an article I'd read in the Harvard Business Review a few weeks earlier, and so I very quickly came up with a strategy to open the meeting. So when we walked into the room, again, it was a large conference room, and the tables were arranged in a horseshoe. So there were 23 executive level nurses. They no longer did hands-on care, but they ran things. They ran major business units in this national, and at this point now today, international healthcare organization. And they're all there. Every single one of them is in their seat, not looking very happy to be there. So Donna and I walk in, there's a small table in front of the room. I sit down, Donna remains standing, and this was the introduction I got. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this is Mike, and he's going to talk to you today about the training. Wow, that's how I was teed up. And so Donna sits down, I stand up, and I opened with this story. And so time out just for a second. I won't give you the whole story right here, but I'll give you the gist of the story. Okay, back and roll. So I look out over these 23 executive level nurses, and this is what I said. I said, I remember pushing my wife down the NICU of Georgetown University Hospital. And we had been in the hospital, my wife had been in the hospital for almost 3 weeks after she'd given birth to our first son, Kevin. And I remember that day leaving, and I looked to the right and I looked to the left, and the NICU at Georgetown has a nurse's station on both sides of the hall. And I just remember how different the last 3 weeks experience, I guess, was for the nurses compared to what it was for us. For them, every day they showed up and they were doing their jobs. This is what they were trained to do. They were professionals and world class at doing it. And every single day they showed up and they took care of our baby son, Kevin. And that's what they did. And they may not necessarily have thought it was a big deal. That's what they did every day. My experience of it was entirely different. For 3 weeks, they were my son Kevin's entire world. He was born in the hospital. He lived in that NICU. He lived in an isolate for 3 weeks. And they provided 24/7 care. In fact, it was one of those nurses who handed my son Kevin to me, and I held him for the first time, not hooked up to a whole bunch of tubes and wires. And he died in my arms. And so I told that story, and then I told the nurses something like this. I said, I owe you. I know you're not Georgetown University. You're a different organization. But the work you do was my entire world for 3 weeks, and that of my family. And I said, so I'm here to help you in any way you can run a better organization. I'm in, and I need your help to do it. So for the next 20 minutes, which is the time you've allotted me, let's talk about the training. So that's what we did. We had an incredible meeting that, by the way, lasted 45 minutes. And at the end of the meeting, when everyone had left the room except for one of the nurses, she came up to me and she said this. She put her hand out and she said, when you were finished telling us the story about your son, when it came to us cooperating and collaborating and being all in on this training, which, by the way, we wanted no part of, you had us in the palm of your hand. Whew. So I tell you that story to make a point, and the point is, let me tell you what the point isn't. This webinar is not about opening up our personal life when we start a meeting in the hopes of transforming the vibe in the room. That's what I happen to do in that one specific situation because the situation was appropriate for it. So that's not, though, the real point here. Later on in the webinar, I'll talk about what I did, sort of the deeper thing of what I did there that turned the tide of that meeting that is applicable to every single business meeting we're in. But caveat or disclaimer here, this is not about telling personal stories to manipulate people into the palm of your hand. What this is about, though, or the what's in it for you to be on this webinar today, is that you will be better able to trade soul-sucking, mind-numbing meetings for transformational time together. So let me just repeat that. When we're finished here at 10 o'clock, you will be better able to make a trade, to trade out your mind-numbing, soul-sucking meetings, and in return, you'll lead transformational time together. That's what's in it for you. Now, for some of you may be saying, well, hold on a second. My meetings aren't mind-numbing. My meetings are not soul-sucking. That doesn't really apply to me. All right, let's think about it a slightly different way. What you'll be able to do, and if you could advance that slide, Michelle, that would be great. You will be better able to lead meetings that transform your people, processes, and products. So it's really important that we understand why we're here, and it's really important for you to know the what's in it for you, because that will help drive a lot of the value of this webinar. So I want to make a distinction here. What many of us think about when it comes to meetings is, I hope this is an efficient meeting. Meaning, I hope we get everything done in a certain amount of time. I hope we don't get too off track. I hope that we can check off all the boxes on our agenda and boom, close the book on it. And by the way, there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. However, if that's all we're getting out of our meetings, we're missing some value. We're missing quite a bit of value. And so if you don't have soul-sucking, mind-numbing meetings where everyone hates to be there, that your meetings are better than that, then perhaps what's in it for you today is to trade your meetings, which are merely efficient, in exchange for meetings, and we use that word very broadly here today. It could be a sit-down meeting, it could be a staff meeting, it could be an informal group talking about something. It's anytime you get people together to collaborate on something. That's what we'll call a meeting. It's trading an efficient meeting, and in exchange, you get a breakthrough meeting. You get people, processes, and products, services, solutions, ideas transformed into something better. So that's why we're here, is to have transformational time together. So, question for you. How many people have ever done this type of exercise? I'm guessing you and or your children have done some version of this exercise. Excuse me just for a moment. There we go. This version of this exercise. This is called the Spaghetti Tower Building Challenge. And as you can see in the image there, the challenge is to get a certain limited number of materials, spaghetti, a little bit of duct tape, a marshmallow, etc. And then you are timed. It's a collaborative team assignment. You are then timed, and the competition is who can build the tallest tower, provided the marshmallow has to be on top. So here is the question. In a group of CEOs, lawyers, and Ivy League MBA students, who do you think built the tallest tower? Think about that for a moment. This challenge has been replicated thousands of times. And among that group of people, if you said CEOs, you'd be right. On average, the CEOs built a spaghetti tower, on average 20 inches tall. The lawyers built on average a spaghetti tower that was 15 inches tall. And on average, the MBA students from the Ivy League schools, theirs was only 10 inches tall, okay? So you got that, CEOs, lawyers, and way down here, MBA students. So what does that tell us? It doesn't tell me a whole lot, all right? However, I've left out one piece of information which may be very illuminating. And that is, this competition was not among just 3 teams. It was among 4 teams. And the 4th team was a team of kindergartners. Yes, kindergartners. And so I'm sure you know where this is going. On average, the kindergartners built a tower that was 22 inches tall. Whenever this challenge was replicated, every single time, yes, you heard me, every single time, kindergartners problem solved and created more effectively than CEOs, lawyers, and MBA students. And the secret sauce to how they did that is really the agenda of our webinar today. So let me just kind of reset the whole thing. What you're here to get out of this session is to have more transformational time together, to create things that are better than what you have right now. The agenda is comprised of 3 specific skills that kindergartners have to a greater extent than CEOs, lawyers, MBA students, and most of us in the work world. So that's why we're here, and that's the agenda on how we're going to get there. So what are the 3 skills? But actually, so before we get to the 3 specific skills, here's the aha. Here's the big idea. Most people would have guessed that CEOs, lawyers, MBA students would have beaten kindergartners mainly because they were more talented, meaning they had education under their belt, they had skills, they had business savvy, et cetera, et cetera. They were more intelligent, more talented, more skilled, and because of that, just looking at that one cue, we would then conclude they will produce a better outcome when they work as a collaborative team. What this study discovered, and what Daniel Coyle wrote extensively about in the Culture Code, and what Google found out after spending millions and millions of dollars over a period of years trying to build the perfect team at Google under the auspices of Project Aristotle, what they all found was this, that when we run a meeting, when we get a group together, the cue we should look for, the lever we should pull to optimize that meeting is not the individuals in the room. That's not completely unimportant, but it's not where we should be giving our attention to. It's not smarter, but safer. So the key to you running an effective meeting, whenever you have run a meeting where when it was over you said, wow, that was an amazing meeting. I never thought we'd be able to produce that today. When you've been able to do that, every single time you've been able to do that, it's because whether you knew it or not, you optimized one condition in the meeting. And that was you made the meeting safe. So we're going to talk about what safe means in this context. But if you remember nothing else from this webinar, remember this phrase, safer, not smarter. So what does that mean? Well, actually, what does it mean? So what it means is people feel comfortable to take risks, to speak up, to do some things that are somewhat unconventional, to do things in a new way. I think you kind of get the point. Safer really means psychological safety. So why is this so important? So you'll see an image of the brain there. And if you look really closely, a part of that brain is the amygdala. And for those of you who are at all familiar with neuroscience and the amygdala, and I'll keep this real short, the amygdala is the part of your brain that is wired to keep you alive. It is constantly scanning for threats in the environment. Now, in our context today, I'm hoping for all of you, that does not mean physical safety when you're in a meeting at work. I know for some it does. I know for some physical safety in the workplace is an issue. We're going to set that to the side. What we're talking about is psychological safety. When you walk into a meeting, when your people walk into a meeting, when they walk into anything that's collaborative, their amygdala is on high alert and it's constantly scanning for threats. We'll talk about what those threats might, you'll help us figure out what those threats might look like in your workplace. But that's what your amygdala is doing, and the amygdala of every single one of your people. It's scanning for threats. And very specifically, it's scanning for disconnects in a sense of belonging to the group. So what a safe meeting does is it creates the conditions that help your amygdala feel comfortable and turn the threat scanner off, or at least way down. So the reason this is important, again, is every single time somebody walks into a meeting in your workplace, the very first thing they're sensing and the very first thing they're potentially erecting defense mechanisms up for is, are there threats? Am I psychologically unsafe? So that's the why behind needing to run a safe meeting. So there are three skills that every single time you've run a breakthrough transformational meeting, you've actually led with these three skills. You may not have known it. It may not have been on your conscious thinking, but these are the three skills that you've employed. And we'll break them out in just a moment. But you've created, you have been a safe leader. You have created a sense of belonging among the people on the team or in the meeting, and you have created the conditions for people to be vulnerable. So the three skills to remember: safety, belonging, and vulnerability. So what do those words actually mean in this context? Let's find out. So when we're talking about safety, we're talking about, are you the leader safe? Do you feel safe to your people? And what that looks like really is, are you a truth teller, and have you created conditions or group norms or meeting norms that feel safe, secure, and comfortable to people from a psychological point of view? We'll break that out in just a moment, but that's what we mean by safe. In terms of belonging, what we're talking about is, does your team feel connected to one another, and do they share an identity? And then lastly, the vulnerability is not what we typically think of as vulnerability. So let's go back to my story for just a moment. Some people might conclude, and actually for a while I concluded, the reason that that story changed the energy in the room and was able to earn collaboration from the group is because I was vulnerable in the way we normally use the word, meaning I sort of opened up the kimono, I shared something very personal, it was kind of raw. It's not what we're talking about at all. What vulnerability means in this context is that we're willing to share the risk of the endeavor. It means that we are willing to say, this is where I need help, and this is a team endeavor. I can't do this without you. And when we're able to create conditions where people understand that and embrace it, we then get trusting collaboration. So those are the big three. The three leadership skills are, am I safe as a leader? Do I create a sense of belonging among the people in the meeting? And lastly, have I created a condition where everybody feels like we're in it together? It's going to take all of us to do it together, and we're willing to share the risks of being weak and asking for help. So those are the three skills. So let's look at the first skill, and that's safety. So actually, question for you And we would love it if you could type in some responses to Michelle. Have you ever been in an unsafe meeting? Psychologically unsafe, meaning you walked in, the meeting started to unfold, you didn't feel comfortable, you didn't feel like the group norm was such that you could really express yourself, that you could take risks, or whatever it looks like for you. Think about a time when you've been in a meeting like that. And the question is, what made it unsafe? Or in another way to say that is, what felt unsafe about it? So think about that, and if a few of you would type into Michelle and give us some responses. Michelle, if you'd be kind enough to read those out loud, that would be great.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Anything?
Not yet.
Not yet. How are we doing?
Nothing yet.
Okay, folks.
I think they're typing away.
Okay, I hope you're typing away. We'll give it another 10 seconds or so. What do you got? Nothing? Okay, so I will conclude.
You're shy today.
Okay, so I will conclude that you either are in perfect meetings or you don't feel comfortable enough yet to share, so that's on me. So what many people will say is that the moment might be too big for the leader. So let's say it's a meeting that's been convened and it's a crisis situation, or that there's a tremendous breakdown or mistake that's been made. And the moment might be too big for the leader. You're not confident in the leader of the meeting being able to handle the situation. So that has made some people feel uncomfortable. Some people feel uncomfortable that they can't disagree or dissent with the leader because there are reprisals if that happens. Or some people feel uncomfortable that they can't offer a contrary opinion to the leader. We're just talking about the leader now, because it doesn't really matter. What they'll do is they'll make a suggestion, but the leader, by virtue of being the leader, will make a suggestion and therefore the group feels it has more weight and their ideas are not heard. So you kind of get the point. This is what we're talking about in an unsafe meeting. And these are some of the ways it shows up at the workplace. So let's take a deeper look at this. Some of the things we'd want to know about a leader. Are you a truth teller? Meaning, do your people perceive you as being authentic, forthright, and honest, and consistent when the situation calls for consistencies? Your people are wondering about you. Do you have a hidden agenda? Or are there competing agendas, which there almost always are in a complex organization? But are you crystal clear about what the most important priority or agenda is? Or again, this idea of dissent. If I disagree with you and I raise my disagreement in the meeting politely, appropriately, how are you going to respond to that? So the very first condition in a meeting that has to feel safe to your people is you. So let's talk about some simple things that we can do as leaders to help our people feel safe with us. So these are three. There are more than three, but just given our time constraints, we're going to look at three today. So the first one is all about body language. So if you can see me, I don't know if I'm in the little screen or big screen on your screen, but hopefully you can see this. If you would hold up your right hand and make an OK sign, that's right, Michelle, just like that, an OK sign, and go ahead and put that on your chin, please. Go ahead and put that on your chin. On your chin, Michelle. Yes, it's finally on the cheek. Okay, so I don't know how many of you started with your chin and moved it down to your cheek, but here's what that silly little exercise demonstrates. When we are forced, so when you are communicating with me, Michelle, okay, and I hear you say something, but I see something different with your body language, I almost always choose to believe what I see. And now all of a sudden, because there is a dissonance here, these two things don't line up, there's a dissonance here, you as a truth teller, in my mind, has taken a hit. So you probably have heard things like this before. Our body language, our facial expression, the way we connect with our eyes. I'm not going to go into the details of that. Just know that it is not insignificant. And in fact, given we all know how powerful a first impression can be, given we all know how powerful a visual impression can be, this is something we have to pay attention to, is the body language we use to lead a meeting must line up with the things we say. Otherwise, our truthfulness and credibility take a hit, and then it becomes an unsafe space to some degree. So that's what we mean by eyes, face, hands, and feet. Let's talk about polishing the bad apple. So we've all heard the expression, one bad apple ruins the entire bunch or ruins the entire barrel. One way to handle that situation is to handle it very directly. So what many people do is ignore it for a while. I know that was my modus operandi. I was just sort of ignore it and hope it goes away and hope the person kind of figures out, you know, you're monopolizing this or your negativity is dragging us down. And then hopefully we'll get back onto the right track. That seldom works. So then what I did, and I thought I was pretty effective at doing it, is I would address it directly, politely, but directly. Sandy, I'm wondering if we could move on to the next topic. I can see that that's important to you. We don't have time to continue along that line of conversation. Put it in the parking lot. Let's talk about it offline. So that would be a polite way of redirecting Sandy. So the first one, just ignore it, doesn't work at all. The second one works pretty well, but it doesn't optimize the safety in the room. So how would we handle that situation? Let me show you.
Mike, I have a quick question.
Yes.
So let's say that the leader has not made everyone in the room feel safe, and
Yes.
we all say, you know, lead from every seat. Is there a way for those in the meeting that aren't the leader of the meeting to create that environment of safety for everyone to share, or does it really depend on who's leading the meeting to have those transformations happen?
Thank you for the question. So there's a book by Sam Smith called Captain Class. Okay, let me just repeat that, Sam Smith, Captain Class. And this gentleman took 10 years of his work life and he studied high-performing teams. And the conclusion he came to was that the most important person on the team that drove results, if you could say there's one main driver person on the team that was responsible for high performance, it was not the leader. It was not the quote-unquote leader by title, okay? It was the person who was the captain, even if they were never recognized as the captain. So it was that person who did not have the title of leader, but took it upon themselves to exercise these safe meeting skills. So to your point, it doesn't have to be the leader. And according to Sam Smith, it almost never is the leader under any circumstances. It's not the leader driving it. So let's take a step back for a moment. What the leader is mainly responsible for, one of the huge takeaways from this, I hope you get, is in meetings, the leader should not be driving. The leader should be creating conditions so that the group can drive it through shared ownership and shared risk. And that oftentimes is accomplished by one of the members of the group being the captain, either formally or informally. Does that help?
It does.
Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you so much for the question. So let's talk about how do we fix or change the negativity when there is a bad apple. Okay, here's the way to do it. In order to optimize safety in the room, it's done much more subtly than the way I used to do it when I would basically politely call the person out. And it's very simple. Not easy, but it's very simple and straightforward. Be warm at all times and deflect the negativity. So one way to do that might be to say, Sandy, I can see this is really something you're passionate about, and it raises a question in my mind. And then what I would do is I would ask the group a question based on something Sandy said, but which is more on track and is more positive. So rather than directing Sandy to, hey, Sandy, put it in the parking lot, I validate Sandy. I bridge to something more appropriate through a question that I ask the group. I draw the group out and I listen actively. So that is a simple, although not necessarily easy thing to do. Frankly, it took me a while to learn how to do it. It's much more subtle, but here's what it does. Here's the key. When Sandy's negativity or Sandy's monopolizing of the conversation happens, it creates an unstable condition in the group. It creates an unsafe condition in the group. And what the group needs more than anything is not for me to put Sandy in her place. What the group needs is to be back on solid ground. What the group needs is to feel safe. What the group needs is for the norms to be reestablished. So again, it's about creating conditions. So rather than getting rid of the bad apple, you just polish the bad apple. So let's go back to the third safety. So we're going to go back one slide, Michelle. Thank you very much. And that, as you'll see, is separate reviews. So if you could go back to the 3 skills under safety, please. Perfect. Separate reviews or separate reviews. Gotcha. What this means is, for most organizations, what we do is we commingle 2 different conversations in performance reviews. We talk about results. Here's how you did, Tom. These were your numbers. These were the metrics. These were the standards. And here's where you met them, exceeded them, underperformed. We have that conversation about results. What we commingle that with is we also have a conversation about how they got there, any progress they've made, and that is destructive to high-performance teams. So what high-performing teams do is they separate those 2 conversations. Whenever it is appropriate to have a review about results, they do that. Whether that's every month, every 6 months, every year, doesn't matter. Whenever that is appropriate to do, those conversations are only about results. On a more daily basis, the conversation is about progress. It's about skill development, and it's about professional development. So that in those daily or weekly conversations, where you're getting down to the nitty-gritty of how people do their jobs and what they need to do to be better at doing their jobs, when you have those kinds of meetings, people feel more safe and secure that they don't have to hide. They don't have to hide their weaknesses. They don't have to make excuses for why they didn't get results, because the conversation's not about results. It's about progress and development. So those would be those are 3 of the skills that leaders employ to create a safe environment in meetings and to be perceived as a truth teller and not too big for the moment. So just kind of reset, there were 3 skills that help create safe transformational meetings. One of which is the safety of the leader himself or herself and the group norms that they establish. That's safety. Let's talk about belonging. So I don't know if we'll spend a lot of time asking you to give us some input. I was hoping that you could help us, by your definition, define culture. So just in the interest of time, think about that just for a moment. I'm not going to ask you to type anything in, but how would you or how do you define culture? Because belonging is really about culture. It's about the meeting culture in your organization. And I might add this, just as you've heard the saying, the way we live our day is the way we live our life, high-performing organizations have found the way they run their meetings is the way they run their organizations. The way people interact in meetings is the way people interact broadly in the organization. The culture of an organization's meeting is a microcosm of the culture of the organization in its entirety. So how would you define culture? I'm going to give you a definition. I didn't make it up. It's a definition by a guy named Seth Godin, and I think it's absolutely brilliant, partly because it's really simple. And it's this. Culture is people like us do things like this. People like us do things like this. And so the question for you is there a trait or value that is shared by your team? You may have people on your team of various ages, various ethnicities, from various countries, having gone to different schools. Some have grown up in Carroll County, some haven't. You get the point. Is there a trait or value that everyone on the team shares. Everyone in the meeting shares. That would help everyone say honesty or creativity or going the extra mile. That describes people like us. So think about that. And then once you've landed on that trait or that value, is there an action? Is there something that you actually do in the work day, either in your interactions with each other or the way you serve your customers? Is there an action that people consistently take that culture reflects? Let me give you a quick example. So Johnson & Johnson, everyone's heard of Johnson & Johnson. Their company has a 311-word credo, okay? And the credo starts like this. We believe our first responsibility is to doctors, nurses, and patients, and mothers, fathers, and all others who use our products and services. And then it goes on. But the opening sentence in the people like us credo of Johnson & Johnson, again, is this. We believe our first responsibility is to doctors, nurses, and patients, mothers, fathers, and others who use our products and services. And back in 1982, September 30th, 1982, some of you may remember that. That was the day that 6 people in Chicago died because there were cyanide-laced Tylenol pills that they took. And if you remember Johnson & Johnson's response, this is going to sound familiar to you. Initially, they weren't quite sure how to handle it. Very complex situation involving millions of people in the United States, involving hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars. The advice they got from Wall Street, their legal counsel, and the FBI, by the way, was not to do a total recall. The FBI didn't want to do a total recall because they thought, my gosh, that will have this epidemic scare across the country and will actually make things worse. The legal team said, my gosh, if you do a recall, you're opening yourself up to all different kinds of liability issues. And then the Wall Street said, your stock is going to absolutely crash. And so James Burke, who just a few years earlier had toured the entire country, visiting most J&J offices, saying, I want you to look at that credo and tell me if it's outdated. I want you to tell me if it's just a bunch of baloney. Do we need to change it? Do we need to fix it? Is it unrealistic? He vetted that credo just a few years earlier. James Burke made a decision to do a total recall, as I'm sure some of you remember, of Tylenol nationwide, which cost the company $100 million. And when they asked him, my gosh, James, this must have, or Mr. Burke, this must have been an incredibly difficult, complex decision. He said the execution of it was incredibly difficult and complex. The decision was simple. We have a 311-word credo, and it starts like this. We believe our first responsibility is to doctors, nurses, and patients, mothers, fathers, and others who use our products and services. And so they clearly understood who people like us were, who they were responsible to, and it clearly and straightforwardly informed their actions. So that's an example of a very large corporation taking the sense of belonging, the shared identity, and having it bind everyone together so that they could come to the right decision and they could execute it effectively. So let's talk a little bit more about it. Let's look under the hood and see what they did. So there are 3 skills. There are 3 things that you as a leader can do to create a sense of belonging among your people. One is stream signals. Daniel Coyle in the book, The Culture Code, he has a different word for it. I didn't want to steal his word and put it on a PowerPoint slide, but I'm going to tell you what it is, and I've given proper attribution. I love the phrase, flood the zone with cues. Okay, so when your people walk into a meeting, and that's the zone, whether it's a conference room, somebody's office, it's around the water cooler, doesn't matter. Are you flooding that zone with belonging cues? I'll give you an example of what some organizations do for belonging cues in a moment, but that's the question. How can you flood the zone with belonging cues. What they also do is they have mantras. A mantra is just a shortened version of the 311 J&J Credo, for instance. We'll look at that in a moment as well. And they absolutely would die on the hill for the cultural value of we are all supporting actors. So we're going to look under the hood of each of those in just a moment, starting with streaming signals. Whoops. Or as Daniel Coyle says, flood the zone with cues. So in his book, The Culture Code, Daniel Coyle spent almost 10 years looking at high-performing organizations, public sector, private sector, sports, entertainment. I mean, you name it, he had a cross-section of high-performing organizations. What he considered a high-performing organization to be was somebody who was in the top 1% performance-wise over a period of 10 years. So these were what he called dynastic organizations. These were not flash in the pans. They had a good year. They had a good quarter. Let's go study the flavor of the month. These were people who performed at a very, very, very elite level, teams in meeting. And every single one of these organizations said our meetings are one of the sort of atomic building blocks that create our culture to do this. And this is what he found. And by the way, these are not going to look like they're terribly sophisticated. But what they would do is they would they would get people together literally in close physical proximity. They would not have people spread out. They'd have people, and in fact, almost always it would be some form of circle. There was lots of eye contact and connection when people talked. People were really attuned to each other. There was appropriate physical touch. So let me be really clear about that appropriate physical touch. So there were high fives, there were fist bumps. You know, in some organizations, it might be a pat on the back, lots of handshaking. But there was lots of physical touch that was appropriate. There were no long speeches, lots of quick interchanges between people. And everybody talks to everybody, no clicks. Everybody talks to everybody. Active listening, and I know that, gosh, that's like such a buzzword, but it was easy to tell visually that people were listening because people went out of their way with their, raising their eyebrows, leaning in. They did these things very intentionally to let people know you have my full attention. And then lastly, they demonstrated lots of what Daniel Coyle calls small courtesies. Opening the door, for instance, saying thank you. So let me just give you an example. When I teach, if any of you have ever been in any of my classes, what I try to do when someone walks in the door is I walk up to them and I shake their hand and I ask them their name, I give them my name, and I ask them a little bit about who they are. And I try to do that for every single person in the room. Oftentimes, if it's a day-long class, in fact, probably all the time, if it's a day-long class, we break for lunch. And sometimes people will bring their lunch back. And so I used to work as a waiter a long time ago. And so what I find myself doing is when someone's done with their plate, I'll walk on by and I'll pick up their plate and I'll throw it in the trash. It's what I do, okay? That's an example of a small courtesy. I'm sure you have your own. But these are the cues that we should be flooding the meeting zone with to help people feel connected. So that's what I call stream. And the reason I put the word stream, and the reason Daniel Coyle uses the word flood, is because, let's come back to the amygdala now for a moment. You'll remember the amygdala is that part of your brain always scanning for threats. The problem, or maybe the problem / benefit to always scanning is your amygdala's always got your back. Now the downside to that is it's always scanning, which means that if I've exhibited these cues to you in one of my classes, you come into the next class and all of a sudden I'm not flooding the zone anymore with belonging clues. You don't feel a sense of belonging. Our amygdala is very insecure. So here's the point. High-performing organizations over and over and over again streaming belonging clues, flooding, not trickling, flooding the zone with belonging cues. All right, so one is streaming signals or flooding the zone with belonging cues. Another one are mantras. All right, so here's sort of the disclaimer here. Man, I don't know if you've ever been to an organization, you've walked into an organization and people have different, the company has like slogans or mottos, Almost like Chick-fil-A. So let's think of Chick-fil-A. Every single person has ever been to Chick-fil-A and has ordered something, and you've gotten your food, and we say, some of us will say, thank you. What do they say?
With pleasure.
With pleasure, or it's my pleasure. And what Daniel Coyle, getting back to Daniel Coyle in the book, The Culture Code, found was, to an outsider, these things sound so cheesy sometimes. It's like, wow, everybody's saying this. It's like they're brainwashed or something. It can't be real. To the organization, it's absolutely, positively real, and it's not cheesy. So a mantra or a brief saying, what it really is, it's this if-then statement that guides actions. Let me give you an example. So if you've ever been to New York City, one of the premier restaurants in New York City is Union Square Cafe. It was founded by a guy named Danny Meyer. He's considered to be the most successful restaurateur, the most knowledgeable restaurateur in the company. He has won, and his restaurants have won more James Beard Awards than any restaurateur in America. If you've been in New York and you haven't been to Union Square Cafe, you may have been to Gramercy Tavern. If you haven't been to Gramercy Tavern, you've probably been to Shake Shack, okay? He's the guy who founded Shake Shack also. All right. And so when he does training, they use mantras everywhere in their training. So for instance, one of their mantras is this: no food, build connection. Which means that to their wait staff, if there are guests at a table and they don't have any food yet, the primary responsibility of the waiter or waitress, the server, is to build connection. That's an if-then statement. So this if-then statement, if no food, build connection, that's a mantra that everybody who works for any of Danny Meyer's restaurants knows. Okay, so mantras. There's two different types of mantras. One type of mantra is when you are leading or coaching in a meeting for someone to be more proficient in a specific skill. You're not looking for creativity. You're not looking for anything outside the box or different. You're just looking to help somebody get better at the thing they're doing. Okay, so we'll talk about what that looks like in a moment. That's different than, this is a group here and we need to come up with something new, improved, creative, better. Something different. Two different mantras depending on the situation. So in the first situation where you're in a meeting and you're coaching or leading someone to improve their skill in a specific task, the mantras focus on the fundamentals, on the specific skill. So let's come back to Danny Meyer for just a moment. It's read the guest. The first thing that any server at a Danny Meyer restaurant does, approaches the table, read the guest. It's a specific skill. If you're a Navy SEAL, one of their mantras is shoot, move, communicate. Shoot, move, communicate. So they are very specific instructions as to what to do. So kind of take a step back here for a moment. This is about belonging. Belonging is about culture. Culture is people like us do things like this. So if you are a Navy SEAL, this is what you do. You shoot, move, communicate. If you're a server at Gramercy Tavern, you read the guest. Very specific instructions to improve the task. Let's say you're looking for something creative and completely outside the box. The mantras are broader and they don't speak to specific skills or actions. They speak to really who you are. So let me give you an example of this. If you were a new employee at Pixar and at Disney, the very first day, in one of the very first onboarding or orientation meetings you'd be in a theater, and you would be asked to sit in the 5th row. Why the 5th row? Because that's where directors sit. Who knew? Directors always sit in the 5th row when they are reviewing any portion of the work as the film's being filmed. And then what happens is Ed Catmull, up until recently, because he recently retired, but Ed Catmull was the former president of Pixar, who was then the president of Disney Animations when Disney bought Pixar in 2006. Ed Catmull would walk up to the front of the room and he would say this: I don't care what you did before. You are now a director and we need your help to make our movies better. So that speaks to this culture and belonging that applies to every single person in the room, every single person on your team in the meeting. So those are some belonging mantras. And then lastly, in terms of belonging, it is, so here are some, so let's just take a moment because I think this is really important. I know we're almost out of time. KIPP Charter School proficiency mantra, read, baby, read. Don't eat the marshmallow, meaning delay your gratification. Speaks to specific behaviors. Creativity, speaking to their shared identity, all of us will learn. And by the way, no robots. We're not looking for cookie cutter people here. No robots. So that's an example from KIPP. This is another example from Navy SEAL Team 6 specifically. You've already heard me say shoot, move, and communicate. That's specific skill. The mantra that speaks to identity, which by the way they use in recruiting, is Navy SEALs are highly intelligent, copious readers. That appeals to a certain type of person. And by the way, it reinforces the type of person they're looking to build once they become a SEAL. So let's talk about vulnerability. In just the few minutes we have left, what is vulnerability? I'll tell you what it is not. In this context, this is what it is not. It is not getting up in front of your team in a meeting and sharing a personal story that's raw. Okay, that's what I did, only because it was appropriate in that situation. But what was really going on, the real purpose of that story was this. Vulnerability is really communicating two things. I need your help. I'm not a lone ranger on this. I can't do this by myself. I need your help, and I recognize this requires a team. I can't do it by myself. So I'm not going to ask you to answer this question, but I think this is a key question to help us demonstrate this type of vulnerability to our team in meetings. In what area of your job do you feel incomplete? You recognize, you know what, I'm not great at this. I may be great at these 10 other things. I'm not great at this. And when you've landed on that, I'm sure we all can make at least a short list of what those things are. Do you communicate that to your team? And do you put yourself out there and ask for help? That's the question. So here are 3 things that you can do to create a more vulnerable environment. Here's what we mean by quit your secret second job. Every single one of you, including me, every single time we show up for work, especially in meetings, we all have a secret second job. You know what that is? It's managing our status in the meeting. We're all trying to make sure that our place in the organization doesn't get knocked down a little bit. So whatever the meeting is about on the surface, hopefully we're paying attention to that. But sometimes managing our secret second job gets in the way of our first job. And so make sure that you're helping people set the status management to the side. Help everyone quit their secret second job. There's a loop, a vulnerability loop, and this is what it looks like. And I hate that this looks so academic, I apologize, but it's really quite simple. You ask for help with one of your teammates. And as powerful as that is, what's more powerful and more important in establishing this safe space, this vulnerable space, is the person you say that to, they now have a choice to make. They can either respond by being vulnerable themselves, sharing the risk, or they can choose not to. They choose not to, there's no loop, and culture has not been established. It hasn't been grown. It hasn't been made stronger. But if they respond with some vulnerable word or action themselves, recognizing it's a team endeavor, now you have created a more robust meeting culture. So that person B is really the key. Okay, we have 2 minutes left. Let me tell you what this is. Upright Citizens Brigade is an improv group. In fact, they are the improv group that Saturday Night Live goes to hunt for new talent. Their specialty is a thing called the Herald. It is a type of improv that is long and very complex and requires all of the actors to think organically almost as one. And I didn't say think all the same thing, but to collaborate fluidly as one. And the reason I put that up there is because I think that describes every single one of us in an organization. That the way change happens today, so much of what we do is improv based upon the skills we have and how we interact with other people. I won't read these. You can look at these right now. But to me, I think that this describes exactly what we'd like the norms to be in a meeting. So, I'm going to end with a story. Let's do just a quick reset. I'm going to end with a story in 60 seconds or less. Yeah, sorry about that.
You're good.
Those are the 3 skills: safety, belonging, and vulnerability. What those skills do, if you could advance the slide, please, is they create a safer place, which is more important than a smarter place. So the what's in it for you, again, was to trade your soul-sucking, mind-numbing meetings for transformational ones. Or it will help you to transform your processes, your people, and your products. Here's my 30-second ending story. Ed Catmull, when Disney bought, he was the president of Pixar. Disney bought Pixar in 2006 because for 10 years, Disney did not produce a single hit. And they could not think of how to change the game for themselves. The only thing they could think of was, well, let's just buy Pixar. Okay, that'll help. And so they bought Pixar in 2006. And Ed Catmull was president. John Lasseter, you've probably seen that name on Toy Story and a whole bunch of other Pixar movies. They bought the company, and these 2 guys were now in charge of Disney Animations. And Ed Catmull, in the opening meeting to the people at Disney, he said, look, we're not here to clone Pixar. We're here to build your studio with your talent and passion. That was 2006. By 2008, they had produced their first movie, and then their second movie, and both of those movies got better reviews and earned more money than any movie in Disney in the previous 10 years. But they were okay. They were better, but okay. And then when the culture of meetings really started to click, that was in 2010. And the next 5 movies that Disney put out were Tangled, Wreck-It Ralph, Frozen, Brave Hero 6, and Zootopia. And so, yes, part of the point of that story is these meeting skills are to blame, if you're a parent or grandparent, for hearing your daughter sing Let It Go 50 million times in the last few years. So the point to that, and the point to that story is not even, to me, so much, wow, look how they turned it around because of these meeting skills. Here's the present inside the present. This is a direct quote from Ed Catmull, and I will read this. The people who made these films are the same people who were there when they were failing. We put in some new systems, they learned new ways of interacting, and they changed their behavior. So here's how we're going to end. I don't know what you think of your current team, and I don't know what you think of how they interact in meetings right now. But the bottom line is this. It's highly likely you have the right team right now. And if you change the way, improve the way, even if you're doing it exceptionally well right now, you will find that that team is capable of more. So my advice to you, my encouragement to you is use these skills to create safe meetings, and you will see the team you have right now be transformed. And in turn, they will transform your processes, your products, and eventually the rest of your organization. So sorry for going over for a few minutes, and thank you very much for being here.
Thank you, Mike. Again, we are out of time for questions. I just wanted to go ahead and say that we are going to have a safe meeting class. I believe it's slated for June 7th.
Correct.
It's a morning half-day workshop, 8 to about 11:45, 11:30.
Yes.
It is pending SHRM and HRCI credits. So those of you who need those credits, look for more information coming out on that. We'll send out some marketing as soon as we get all of the, as soon as we get that underway. Mike, I mean, I said it at our last PowerBrew, you create safe meetings. I mean, when you teach here, you really get to the root of the problem of any organization. So kudos to you.
Thank you. Thank you.
I think that the safe meetings class could, really be a benefit to a lot of people out there. So
I appreciate that.
Thank you
Thanks.
for joining us.
You're welcome.
And we will announce next month's PowerBrew in the next few weeks as soon as we get that lined up. So thank you again for everyone for joining.
Thank you,
And we'll
folks.
see you next month. Thanks again, Mike.
Mhm.